Welcome back, everyone, to Business Aspirin. I'm your host, Clint Junell, and today we have Bernard Mumford from Mumford Restoration out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is a podcast where we talk to business owners and entrepreneurs in order to help you solve business pain points before you experience them. And so today we have Bernard. Bernard, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you on. It's fun to have guys that are not, that are into specialty things that kind of make a unique experience for us when we have these conversations. So let's talk a little bit about you and let's talk about the development of Mumford Restoration, how all that came about.
Sure. Well, I am just happen to be the founder, and so it is many years we've been involved. But now I'm a business partner with my son, and we've had some real growth. When you add the right team members, so we've had some real growth recently. So you could actually say, well, we have been more effective in this past 7 years than we have in all of the other years.
Well, that's good, right? And that's
Mm.
good that your son's come on and kind of help navigate that for sure. So you are a specialty restoration contractor,
That's
correct? You
right.
deal with, go ahead.
So we pretty much restore all the things in a house that are sentimental. So we often, our shop is filled with things that mean or have meaning to each of the owners. And it can also come from fire or water damage, but most of our things that we work on are sentimental.
Sure. And so it's artwork, photos. Like my understanding is how you kind of got started in this space was your mom had a piece of furniture that needed to be restored.
That's right. Yeah, well, we were building a house for my mom, and when she decided to buy some furniture from England, she said, well, when it's raining outside and you can't do any brickwork, why don't you work on some of this furniture? And that's how I started learning. And that was 43 years ago.
So the question that I have is, did you actually restore those correctly or did you do them wrong and mom yelled at you and then you had to learn to restore them correctly? Which one came first?
I think failure, in fact, I believe that if I was to answer one of your questions, it would end with that I ran out of things to fail at. And so as I went along, I was learning and still learning, even today. So, yes, it was a lot of failure, a lot of progress, and definitely learning on the way.
Yeah, so you've created Munford just over 40 years ago. Is that accurate? Accurate? Is
Yeah,
it
we're
more
in
than
the
that now?
43rd year,
43rd.
1982, 43rd year. That's right, since I was 20.
It's pretty great. In all essentially in the same place? Like you've stayed in Raleigh the entire time?
No, no, actually started in Kansas City and then we were in California. And then for 29 years, we've been here in Raleigh since 96.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. So let's talk about that then. You started in Kansas City then.
Yeah, so it was, how do you say, the beginnings when I started to repair furniture and do it for folks that on the side. And as I repaired stuff, and then word of mouth caught on, but then I had to learn. And a friend of mine said, well, I'm going to remodel restaurants. Why don't you refinish the chairs? And I actually had to learn how to refinish chairs. And I did a few hundred chairs, and that's how we learned.
Well, that's pretty
And
great.
so from there, I never stopped.
Okay, and then what took you to California?
So we were actually moving there for family reasons, and I took over a piano restoration shop. Instead of going to college, one of my dad's mentors said, hey, why don't you give him the money to take over a business rather than going to get a degree? Because I only went to college for 3 days and I didn't like it. And so when he had some advice from one of a very successful friend of his, said, well, why don't you take over a business, took over a piano restoration shop and had to learn all the piano restoration.
That's pretty great, right? Because that's a very unique side of the business to just do
Yeah,
that,
yeah. So
right?
so we still are involved. In fact, we do everything that can be done to a piano, full rebuilding, all technical, restringing, all the action work. And so this has been pretty much the whole 40 years or 42 have been involved in pianos.
What's the most unique thing you've worked on?
Okay, well, I can definitely tell you that story. We worked on a vase that was handmade in China, and it was built in handmade 900. So it was the oldest piece we've worked on. It was a $5 million value, and the auction company dropped the vase and broke a hole in the side of it. It was about 9.5 inches tall, And one of my metallurgist team had the confidence and the courage to put the fragments back into the vase using a microscope to detect each of the pieces to be adhered. It was handmade from silver and overlaid with gold with high detail. And so I believe that the value somehow was cut more than half, maybe to 2.5 million or $2 million due to the damage, but it was restored and shipped back to China.
Wow. And so what would have been worth if you hadn't restored it? Nothing?
Well, I think that the diminishing, in other words, because it was handmade and it was hand repaired, it didn't lose all of its value. And so it would be hard for me to answer definitively because was not part of the reappraisal, but I could easily see that it was at least half diminished by the auction company dropping it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
it's
they
interesting.
insured it.
It's an interesting point that you had someone that had the courage and willingness to effectuate the repair of an item that had been damaged. And part of that world, it's kintsugi to do that, right? That's what they call that term. Is they take a plate that's been
Yes,
broken and they glue it back together with gold, and it's the value is there because you've repaired a broken item with gold. So it's really unique that you've
exactly.
done that, and I find it very interesting that, like, I think it's important that we highlight the fact that you had an employee that had never done anything like that, right? But had the confidence and had the courage and the willingness to execute on a repair that was going to be very valuable for somebody else, to at least save them some trouble, not fully restore the value of a $5 million vase, but still that means you know how to hire good people too, right, Bernard?
Well, I think the real point here, Clint, is that you're only as good as your team. And I couldn't be more grateful for the folks that have the courage to take on. And this is one of the most important things we could cover is how connected are you and how well can you turn over to folks that have the courage to step forward and take that on. We currently have a unique project that is a $30,000 painting and it's painted both sides on a glass panel and that panel spins to see both sides with translucence between. And one of my team was able also to take the courage to touch up the translucence and repair the damage that was caused by moving. And so she was able to accomplish that. So this is happening every day. The folks that step up to take on something that I wouldn't want to touch myself. I might be able to talk about what needs to be done, but then I'm grateful, extremely grateful for those who take on the courage to do it.
Yes, you've got obviously some artisans and some very skilled people that are working with you. How did you find these people?
Well, that is a great question. And I think that along the way, I became one of those people that had the black book of the right person to do the right project. And as I built on that, I created a model that enabled me to turn to the people that were best suited to that project. So we often say, hey, we work with porcelain to pianos and everything in between. We actually work in 30 categories. So we even have a gentleman that does only music box repair. So as I built this and worked on it over the years, we ended up connecting with skilled people. And then we had to make it into something that was a win for the customer, a win for our craftsmen, and a win for Mumford Restoration when it's possible. And so that model has actually turned out to work well, but it was a long time in development.
Sure. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Like, it'd be unique to see this process take place in your company and watch them go to work and opt and decide that they're ready to work on something specific and kind of execute on that. Do you ever have projects you turn down, or do you always figure it out?
Well, having my son as a business partner has created some new rules, and one of his rules is that we have to have exactly the right craftsman before we take on the project, because of how many times I've gotten myself into trouble by taking on a project that wasn't. As small business owners, that there are jobs that we take on that don't fit, and when they don't fit, they can actually drag down all the other jobs that you're doing or the other projects you're working on because this one is, as we say, the big hairy ball of problems or the ball of worms or however you want to describe that. And so now when we are connected, we're often asking about a job and connecting that with our our best team person for that. And if we say no, it is usually because of finances, not usually because of the skill level. So we have a woodworker from Argentina. We have a father and son team that are just the best actual restorers. We have a French polishing team. In each of these folks, we try to find the project that's suited to them.
Okay. That's, I mean, it's so unique listening to you talk about that. That's like, there's all kinds of things running through my head in terms of questions. It's like, okay, well, then at that point, you've got to determine, it's a project we want to do. This is the right person that can do this project. How do you, like, how do you know? Like, I get it. Like, you've been through certain things and you've done certain things potentially over and over again, but something unique comes in and you have to hand somebody a person. How would you know if you're in the normal restoration space, plumbing world, HVAC world? There'd be this technician. How do you know that your artisan, or how would an entrepreneur know that their technician is capable of taking on something new? What do you look for to be like, all right, this is the right person. They're going to make this work.
Well, I think that's a great question, Clint, because it really comes down to how good of a relationship and how much of a bridge of trust have we built between our sales team and our craftsmen, and how well can they communicate what the expectations of the customer are, and then also to communicate those well to the craftsmen so that they can come up to the level of expectation that makes a satisfactory result. And that is a challenge. I think that's part of how our model works, is that we have to have this trust. And when that trust comes into, it's because we've been through some other projects that required a great deal of trust. And now you could drive a tractor trailer across the bridge of trust because it holds up to most any job. And I think that's when we know that we are grateful for these team members, because they can carry and they can do more. Often we find that folks have more skill than we actually have been
Absolutely.
giving them credit for.
Sure. We see that all the time. And I like
Yes,
how
sir.
you're saying that. I mean, we operate off of a system called EOS, which is an entrepreneurial operating
Yeah,
system that kind of helps us
yes,
train
sir.
things out. One of the things they talk about is making sure you have the right people in the right seats, and everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction. And it sounds like you guys have done that really pretty well. Like,
Yeah,
you're not in an environment like in restoration space. There's a lot of guys that can sling fans. Like, a lot of guys can suck up water. A lot of guys can, do the parts and pieces of loading up contents or whatever and get them out. But you're not in that space. Like, you can't just have a technician. You have to have somebody that's a skilled craftsman to do what you're doing, which is super unique. And you've been able to obviously do that well and successfully and keep these people with you as part of your team. And that says a lot about you and how you guys have orchestrated and structured business. And so kudos to you for that. What advice would you give to someone about finding team members? Because you've obviously done it really well. Most of us don't have to find exceptionally skilled people as an entrepreneur. Let's talk a little bit about what you would share with someone that's looking for team members when they're growing their business, whatever it may be, service business, home service business, whatever, about going and finding those team members and then building that trust and building those relationships.
well, I guess I would have a three-part answer to that, Clint. The first one would be that I am a believer in the EOS. I think it has really helped us to be more clear in what we're doing and where we're headed. And then second is that we have taken on an apprenticeship program that has helped folks to find their way. And we just now have started a guild, and that guild is hopefully going to help us to create craftsmen that have been trained properly, that are being brought forward because craftsmanship is in decline. And I think that's kind of what you're saying in the background. So, as craftsmanship's in decline, how do we train the future? A good example is our gunsmith is 85 years old, and we are needing an apprentice for him. And we haven't found exactly the right guy, but we're looking at about maybe 10 years for him to be. And I don't think that our gunsmith has 10 years to train him. So, but how much could he help him learn? And so, there's apprenticeship has really become something that's so fulfilling for me, because I end up with being able to help someone find the work they love. And I didn't realize how fulfilling that would be. So that's kind of the second part. And then the third part of the answer is wow, we all struggle with how do we find the next person? how do we find an apprentice, or how do we find someone that has the motivation to learn or already has the skill? And this is a constant issue. It always is something. All right, how do we recruit someone? How do we train them? And so I think that was kind of the inspiration for our apprenticeship program, was to say, well, we need to work on the future of craftsmanship. And that has kind of supported one another. But I don't have a really great answer other than you have to go through several people being recruited before you land on the one that you actually can see that they have skill, or they have skill that has the potential for skill, I would say.
Sure. And I mean, I think that's fair. Like, it's hard to figure out how to do that. And then it's some of you got to figure out how much trust you place in someone while they're learning the process.
Yes.
And that's a unique kind of environment. I was fortunate to grow up. I grew up in the plumbing, heating, and air conditioning space. My grandfather started a plumbing company. My dad then added HVAC, central heating air, when it became a thing that existed onto that mix. And so I grew up digging ditches and crawling under houses, and I learned how to sweat pipes together, and I learned how to. I mean, there's things that I did that nobody can do anymore. It's not even legal to do. Like, I learned how to lead and Okama cast iron pipes. My grandfather taught me how to
Yes.
do, which is a unique process, but you can't even have it anymore, obviously, right? Like, it's
Hmm.
contaminating the environment and all those kinds of things. But I'd learned how to do that. And I think it's important that we take the time to train and teach the next generation of craftsmen and show them the value in doing that. I think because it's interesting. What is your take on then technology? Like, because I learned a skill that is no longer valid. It was replaced by pipe and glue, right? Like, you primer and glued a PVC pipe after that. And that'll become something else in the future as well. In your case, what's your perception on technology in the content restoration space?
Well, that's a great question too, because what happens is that we see the future of possibly doing some 3D printing of parts, but I think that we really try to stick to the old-fashioned ways. So we're actually fabricating the parts out of wood. We just made a hand railing for a stairway, a 12-foot hand railing. And then you see that the emphasis is on variety, because we also have a suit of armor from the Philippines from 1790. And that suit of armor is made out of buffalo horn, and it was actually used by the Spaniards in the 16th century. And so, how do we order the buffalo horn, and how do we shape that and get the chainmail to be hooked to it? And so the variety becomes such a challenge that we're kind of applying skills and patience and talent to whatever shows. But I would say that we mostly are focused on the old ways, the old tradition. And we also use lacquer finishes, which have been around for 100 years pretty much. And those lacquer finishes are the thing that we do the most of. But then we also do French polishing and oil and wax, and so, how do we keep the tradition alive, but then be open to something like this new stripping mechanism that is using laser technology to strip? And so, hopefully, the value of that, or the cost of that, will come down. Maybe that will be something that we could apply to speed up the removal of finish. That may be helpful. So, I think it is two sides of it, but I'd say we lean more towards the traditional.
Okay. And I mean, that's great. I think in a lot of cases that still shows the value of you guys as a company. Like, I saw it all runs together for me. So I'm not 100% accurate where I was, but I think it was an RIA, Restoration Industry Association trade show. And they had someone that was showcasing a laser. So they had, they were going through a process, and they'd smoke up a piece of artwork, and the laser was set so it would, eat the soot away from the artwork, but wouldn't damage the artwork. And I'm assuming that's interesting. They were doing the
Hmm.
exterior of buildings with some of that and some other unique things with the lasers. And I'm like, it's pretty cool. Seems like it could be a little sketchy. Like, at some point you hit a painting and it's not exactly right because and then you burn through a paint. I don't know how that works. Like, I'd be terrified of that process. But it's funny, like, when we think about this, like, I tell people because I have a restoration company in DFW as well. And I tell people that we're a full service restoration company. We do contents and structures and mitigation and repair. But I tell them all the time, like, I don't really do content restoration. I do content cleaning. Like, if I can wipe the
Yes.
smoke off of it, great, I'll do that. But if it's got to be sanded and refinished, or it's got to be wood creamed, or any of those things that you would do, like, that's not me. It's interesting that like you're in a very niche service and you've
Yes.
been very successful doing that. And I think that's spectacular. Like I love hearing that.
Yeah, so you well described, the situation where that we are not competing for anything in cleaning. We usually are doing the things that are beyond cleaning, which you're already aware of. And so we become the subcontractor of all those folks that have something that's beyond cleaning, but it's still sentimental. Do you see the sentimental value still there? And so if I was to encourage any of your listeners, it would be to find your niche and stick with that and deepen your niche so that you end up actually doing the thing that brings a value and try not to spread out too much on too wide of a niche.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people that go thin and wide and then they're not profitable
Yes.
in any of the things that they're doing. Clearly people come to you because like I wouldn't be able to do what you do. So I'm going to have to find somebody that can do that type of work, that's going to be able to take this, $5 million painting or $5 million vase and do something with it. And I think that's unique.
Mhm.
Question: do you ever do organs, like big church organs?
We do. And now there is a guy there, and speaking of the craftsmanship in decline, there's only two guys in the United States that really do those large, where the pipes are in the wall kind of organs, the $200,000 organ. And so we usually call him when it's a giant one like that. But yes, we do a lot of the smaller ones, pianos, organs, and musical instruments of every kind. And so, yeah, there's a guy that is more technically inclined to do that kind of work. But then when you get into those large ones, wow, you have to have such a skill that we turn to a guy. He comes from Ohio. So you see how it's really knowing the right guy.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's valid, right? This conversation comes up all the time just in life. And I try to convey this same message to my 17-year-old because he's got a lot of connections. He played hockey. He's got a lot of connections with a lot of people, some former pro athletes, just people
Mm.
that would be on his side and pull for him. You said, hey, it's life is about relationships, right? You got to have connections. You got to know who can help you. You got to know who can address something that you can't address. And my son has said to me in the past, and I think he's starting to learn the truth of this, but he said to me, is like, well, I don't want to ask them about that because I feel like I'm just taking advantage. I'm like, no, you've built this relationship with this person and they like you and they want to help you. And
Yes.
if you're a good human and you do the right thing for the right reason, then people are going to want to help you. And it's not taking advantage of it. It's like they want to help. We all want to help,
Yes.
especially somebody we like, right? And so I think that's important that people understand leaning on others for help is often a very good thing to do because you don't want to take on a big pipe organ and try to do it and mess it up because you know somebody that can actually do it and you can put the person in contact with the right person to handle it. I think it's important because sometimes you can't just fake it till you make it. Because if you fake it till you make it on a $200,000 organ and you screw that whole thing up, then what does that do to your company, right?
Yes, that's right. So the caution, to follow the process, what we try to promote is to match the process to the need, which is really important because see in that large organ example, we want to make sure that right guy, the right technician is applying to that process. And the same with finishing is that, hey, this piece of furniture fits right into our paradigm, or there are ones that are needing the French polish team or the and so matching, I think that's what preserves and increases value of things that you're restoring is that you're matching the process with the need.
Sure, I think that's valid. What is your most common what service do you provide the most of on what type of product? Like what do
Well,
you
it's mostly furniture. Then if you were to say, 20th century, 19th century furniture is the majority of we work on. And then next most would be brass and silver. We do a lot of brass restoration. We do, brass beds and brass of every kind. And then next is art. And then, of course, there's pianos, and some of those are equally about the same amount of sales that we have. But we end up with furniture being most furniture and upholstery are really considered to be the same as furniture, the reupholstery, restoration of fabrics, all that kind of thing.
That's great. So how do you ensure in these different verticals that the customer gets an exceptional experience?
Well, that's a great question too, is that how do we learn the expectations from sales to make sure that promises were not made that were out of ordinary, right? And then how do we deliver it? Because I think that in your experience too, you've seen that the dichotomy between sales and production will always be there. How well can we manage that by having sales commit properly and then to have production deliver on those promises as well as we can. And when we fail, let's just do it again. And I think that's how we build a relationship because if we fail, which I told you already that we ran out of things to fail at, when we fail, we're just going to do it again until that customer feels like they've been cared for. And I think that's how we also build a reputation.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a unique perspective. Is like we're going to fail at things, and here's the reality for your space and my space as well. Is the restoration business only exists because things didn't go the way they were supposed to. If everything went exactly like it was supposed to, we would not have careers.
That's
So
exactly right.
if you set that expectation with your customer that, hey, I'm going to do my best job to take care of this, but sometimes things don't go perfectly, then it's a matter of how we correct it and make it right. So we may
That's
fail,
right.
but if we fix yours, then that's a good statement of our value to you and trying to make sure that you have a good customer experience. And I love how you said that. What is something? I mean, you started this obviously a long time ago. You were just a pup, obviously, when you started this thing. What is something you wish you had known before you started?
Well, I think it was, I would say I've already mentioned that digging the niche deeper and sticking to what you really want to do. And I'd say second would be making sure that it's something that you love, because the only reason I would stay in this work is because I knew if I went to a different business, I was taking me with me. And so I better learn how to run this business as I could, or the best I could, because I am having to have personal growth as well. So, how well can I grow personally in order to grow my business? Because often our small business becomes so much like the owner. Where is it that I need to learn? And where am I also learning how to give instead of take? That was a big one for me. I was wanting to take, and as I progressed on that, it would be sticking in mediocrity. But as soon as I really started to decide that it was time to give, that's when things turned. So I would give that to anybody who's starting a business. Make sure you love it, and then make sure that you're learning how to give more than you're actually receiving.
Yeah, I mean, if you're miserable doing what you're doing, why continue to do it? Right? Like, go do something else. Like, and even if you're making a ton of money doing it, if you're still miserable, what's the value in that? And I think that's a great point because I mean, the reality is like, how unfortunate would it be if you were the same person 10 years from now that you are right now? You hope to be able to
Yes.
grow and mature and develop. And obviously, you've done that over time and learned how to do restoration and learned how to give and learned how to be a better person, right? Like, it's just the maturity of all that kind of helps you go, this doesn't really have to be about me. Which is the whole point of this podcast, right? Like we're doing this whole podcast simply because I've banged my head against the wall in several different things and still at times do. And I want to be able to, as much as I can, provide value to those around us so they can watch this podcast and learn how to avoid some of those pitfalls and learn from guys like you that are like, listen, this is how you find skilled craftsmen. This is the way you would go about ensuring you're focusing on a niche and don't let yourself get spread so thin that you take on all these different things. Then you fail at all of them and you're not profitable at anything. In hopes that these guys can have success without having to, you know, they get the business aspirin that we provide instead of having the pains that we've provided, and I,
Well, I
I
think that
love,
you and I would agree that any time that we could save them from making a mistake that we did, we would be fulfilling our purpose.
yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Like it makes my life better to know if somebody listens to this and they gain a nugget of information and they're able to apply that and not have a problem. And some of that we may never see. And some of it we may run into someone a decade from now at a trade show and they're like, "Man, I listened to that podcast and I got started and you guys gave me some info and I'd love to hear some of those things. If that happens, if great, if not, it is what it is. We're still doing it and we're still providing this in hopes that someone can navigate that. Is
Yeah.
there anything that has occurred that you just absolutely didn't see coming? You're like, oh wow, I didn't expect that, or I never saw that coming, and how did you
Well,
navigate that?
I think that one of the seeds that was planted early on for me was is that Well, you've got to keep your labor at about 33% in order to make your profit margin work. And so it took me about 15 years or 18 years to actually apply that seed that was planted early on for me to get my margin right. I think that's important so that a business owner can say, all right, well, if you're having some advice from somebody who's a mentor or somebody who's along in business pretty far and they're giving you a seed, then you want to take action on how to implement that sooner or as soon as you can to protect your margin and make sure that you're in a niche that you enjoy and that you're able to really produce because survival is one thing, but then also the long-term survival has to have a profit.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that because you know, sometimes we don't talk about that enough, but the reality is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. There's so many times that I know individuals that they're super proud of their revenue, and kudos to you for running $12 million in revenue, but you have zero profit. Like you've burned through all
Yes.
of it. You're not operating well. You have nothing to show for it. You don't even know you don't have anything to show for it. I was just at a conference this week, and there was a guy that was running $12 million in revenue, and he was actually going negative every year. He was losing $1 million every year. And I mean, how, like, part of it's because he just didn't know operationally that he was losing that kind of money. He wasn't paying attention to it. He knew money was coming in. He thought that was the right way to do it. He was fat on operations. He was fat on staff. He was fat on marketing that wasn't providing him value. And like he was just losing money operationally because he didn't know. So thank you for saying that. Like, make sure when guys, if you're listening to this and you're providing a service, you have to be profitable on the service that you're providing. Maybe not every little piece of your service may not be insanely profitable, but at the end of the day, and in your case, Bernard, you want to be able to give more. Well, there's nothing to give if I don't make any money to be able to give it away.
That's
I can't give,
exactly right.
I can't serve, I can't do the things that really matter if I'm not being profitable. So it's not evil to make money and be profitable. You have to make a margin in order to be able to continue doing what you're trying to do. Because if you go negative all the time, in some cases, guys do because they feel bad. They want to help Mrs. Smith and they want to help her in this time. And that's great. And you have the opportunity to do that. But if you do that for everybody, then suddenly you can't do it for anyone.
Well, I think that some of the folks that are probably going to listen to this podcast are going to be what I consider to be the trading dollars. The folks that are working 80 hours a week and they end up without measuring. Because if I was to recommend anything, it's to measure, measure, measure. Because if you are trading dollars and you end up with $12 million in sales and you spent 12,800,000, you are trading dollars and working for nothing. And that trading dollars is a miserable life to lead. And I've done that too.
Yeah. And then you've just bought yourself a job. You now
Exactly.
just own a job that's costing you more and more, and you're losing the things that matter in that process. Well, I want to be respectful at the time, and we committed to you at like 35 minutes or so. We're right at that time. So, what would you consider the best piece of advice you could give an aspiring entrepreneur?
I would say just what I had already said that I can repeat, which is to make sure that it's something that you love, to measure to make sure you've got the margin you need, and to stick with the niche and dig the niche deeper so that that is a real value added. And it's a value that you can give to others that they can easily see. And so it might be along the supply chain, as we say, that you are giving a value. How does that fit and how do I make that even better? Because it's a continual challenge as competitors grow. I created 4 competitors that all worked for me. So how can I do better than them? Which means that I am continuously on the edge of challenge to work until my team is better than what I've created before, a better version of ourselves as we move forward.
Such good information. Such a great conversation, Bernard. I really appreciate you being on. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your wisdom. I thank you for your willingness to jump on here with us and help the next generation of entrepreneurs get started.
Well, I believe in the purpose you have, Clint. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Take care. We'll
All
talk.
right. All right.
Take care.